que con el hijo tan enfermo que ha tenido y trayendo a su amiga con los hijos de la amiga, o sea, es un alto riesgo de que Asher se vuelva a enfermar.
Sí.
Pero ¿qué te diré? Ay.
Hello,
Hola.
good evening.
Hi. Hi, hon.
Hello, hello. So it's Thursday night once again, and welcome to our ongoing program on the Mahayana Lojong in 7 points. So this program is kind of going a little indefinitely until we are able to cover most of the basis for this entire text. As I have emphasized again and again in this particular series, there's a reason why this text is called Mahayana Lojong in 7 points. So if we pay attention to the kind of organizational structure of this text, that's very helpful. If we pay attention to that, that there's an organizational structure to this text, and keeping in mind that there is a main practice, which is in the 2nd point. Then the other 6 points are arranged in a way that the author felt can support the main practice. Looking at a little bit of like the development of this text, the history of it, gleaning at some of the other Lojong texts, of which there are quite a number of them, I think it's fair to say that many of these one-liners, or many of these sometimes called slogans, very likely originated from Atisha. Atisha is credited with the person who brought this particular style of training the mind that he brought from India to Tibet when he came to Tibet in the 11th century. Atisha was the originator of this style of training the mind. But it is said that in Atisha's own time, he kept the instruction of Lojong only to those that were closest to him, not out of favoritism, right? We have to think a little bit like, why? Why did he just keep this Lojong tradition to those who were closest to him? And in fact, it seems like he didn't even give a name to this style of training. It was left to later developments that you have the notion of a Lojong tradition. Because in the broadest sense, Lojong can describe any, right? Any kind of technique or approach that trains the mind. Literally, that's what it means. Lojong. Jong is to train. And lo is one of several words that, one of several Tibetan words that we translate into mind. Sometimes in other contexts, the word mind in Tibetan is sem. So in other contexts, it's like rig. So lo is one of many words that we can translate as mind. But in this context, maybe even the English word attitude is a pretty good one, right? To train or to retrain one's attitude, to retrain one's outlook, so that the self-cherishing outlook that we have right now can be transformed into an other cherishing outlook. What's also interesting is that it is said that Atisha learned this style of practice. In particular, of his many teachers, he learned this from a teacher that was not in India, but rather in Southeast Asia. A lot of people today think that it's in the Sumatra island of the country Indonesia. That Atisha probably spent 10, 12 years in Sumatra Island training with the teacher there. Referred to most commonly in Tibetan sources as Serlingpa. But Serling is a geographic description, which is literally the Golden Islands. The Golden Islands, historians today believe, are basically the Malay archipelago, that whole area, all the different islands, that is now Indonesia, Malaysia, all that whole area was in ancient times called the Golden Island. Sometimes also Golden Land. So Suvarna Dwipa and Suvarna Bhumi. Suvarna Bhumi is the Golden Land. And for some people, some historians, they think that whereas Golden Island refers to the Malay archipelago, which today includes like all the islands, and there are lots and lots of islands in Indonesia, and also the island and the peninsula of Malaysia and Borneo. Whereas Suvarna Bhumi, the Golden Land, referred to mainland Southeast Asia, so Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, those areas. But anyway, what's interesting is that Atisha said, of all the teachers that taught him Bodhicitta, right, which we know is the main training, right, in the Lojong 7 points. Second point. So here, law, mind, what is it that we're training? We are training the self-cherishing outlook and attitude to turn it into a other cherishing, in other words, into bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is the other cherishing attitude, the other cherishing mind. Now, bodhicitta, that mind in Tibetan, is called Changchup Sem. So Sem, Changchup is awaken or awakening. Sem is mind. Sem is another word that is also translated as mind or heart. So the awakened heart, the awakening heart. So you could say it's changing law, this attitude, which is now self-cherishing, into the sem, the heart, the mind, the attitude that is other cherishing. So he says that he learned bodhicitta from many masters, including great masters in India, in what's today Bangladesh. And the one, he says, that really struck a chord, so to say, the one that really succeeded in causing genuine bodhicitta to arise in Atisha, he said, is the master from the Golden Islands. Which means, for me, it's very interesting. It's saying he learned this from the boonies. I mean, India and where he came from was the heartland of Buddhism. But he didn't meet the person who succeeded in really convincing him and causing his bodhicitta to arise genuinely, was someone way over in some obscure island, not at the center of where Buddhism was flourishing, but in an outpost, in other words. And then more interestingly, Atisha said, he said, the other teachers, the other masters, when they taught about this other cherishing bodhicitta attitude, bodhicitta mind, bodhicitta resolve, they emphasize the necessity to kind of relate to self-cherishing almost like an enemy. As in, right? Self-cherishing is, generally we say this, self-cherishing is the obstacle to other cherishing. And as long as we are stuck in self-cherishing, all the things that we do, all the results that come will involve suffering. So from that perspective, self-cherishing is the enemy. He says, however, the master from the Golden Islands, in some records, his name is given as Dharmakirti. Dharmakirti means discernment with Dharma, having Dharma discernment. So it's said that Dharmakirti, and there are quite a few Dharmakirtis in the history of Buddhism. There's a famous logician who was Indian, also called Dharmakirti, but this is Dharmakirti, the one from the Golden Island. Atisha said, Dharmakirti had a very special way of teaching bodhicitta, which is, Atisha said, whereas all the other masters, would focus on how self-cherishing is an enemy, that we have to defeat self-cherishing if we are ever to have genuine other cherishing. He says, Sir Lingpa, the master from the Golden Island, taught a way that embraces self-cherishing. And that's really interesting. Like I said, Sir Lingpa starts with self-cherishing. So in other words, he said, Sir Lingpa's approach is to say, okay, look, you want to be happy, don't you? You don't want suffering, right? So let's start with that. If you don't want suffering, if you don't want happiness, yes, that is self-cherishing. And so that can lead to suffering, but if you know how to skillfully work with self-cherishing, then self-cherishing becomes a way to be free from self-cherishing. So sometimes, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he says, yes, you can say that we all are selfish. So he says, and we can also say, selfishness leads to suffering. More immediately, I think suffering to those people around us. Long-term, suffering for ourselves. He says, yes. He says, but there is an intelligent way to be selfish, and there is a self-defeating way of being selfish. The self-defeating way of being selfish is, even though you really want happiness and don't want suffering, but based on not understanding where suffering comes from and where happiness comes from, even though our desire is to have happiness and freedom from suffering, we again and again destroy the causes of happiness and never stop investing in the causes of suffering. So he says, through the Dharma, if self-cherishing if selfishness is truly what you want, now you have to practice Dharma. You have to practice the intelligent way to really give what you truly want. So we begin without making self-cherishing an enemy. It says that, Atisha said, this is the specialty of the master from the Golden Islands. And so from that, I feel that, for many of us, this is a very useful way to enter the path. Which is self-cherishing. First of all, you could say that it's innate. Remember, way back I said, why? Although I didn't use self-cherishing, I said the desire to be happy, which Hitler and all the proverbial Hitlers had that desire. The desire to be happy, which the Dalai Lama and all the proverbial Dalai Lamas, the Mother Teresa's and all the proverbial Mother Teresa's also have the same desire to be happy. Another way of putting that is they want for themselves happiness, self-cherishing. But without the Dharma, self-cherishing can go so wrong. With the Dharma, self-cherishing can lead to other cherishing. When I first came to Asheville, someone who I got to know, I think I mentioned this before. When we first started Urban Dharma, one day we used to have an area at Urban Dharma where you could sit and drink tea. And we used to have a lot more leisurely time and we would sit and drink tea. And one time I was drinking tea with this friend and he decided to kind of share with me. He said, I don't know how much you know about this area. I don't know how long you've been here. But I, born and raised in this area. And so I thought he was talking about Asheville and how quirky it is and, kind of the hippie stuff and all that. Or maybe tell me that, it didn't used to be like this. And it turns out, no, he said, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the South. I was like, oh, the South. I was like, well, I guess I don't know. I mean, I wasn't even born and didn't grow up in the United States to start with, like the South, like that's even more of a mystery, or not even cognizant, like there's all these, areas per se. I said, so do tell, what is it? He said, well, you need to understand that in the South, even with people like me, he's talking about himself, that have basically quite clearly intellectually, emotionally, or like to think emotionally, but for sure intellectually, have decided that the way that I was raised and my environment, what basically he's saying the prevalent kind of religious, spiritual view of this area, he says, even for people like me who have left that behind or no longer find that to be compelling, he said, nonetheless, I can tell you, he said, we all carry still the baggage of that kind of tradition. And I said, so, and what would you say it is? And that I need to know. He said, well, sure, there's a lot of good stuff, but then what you need to know is guilt is a very big burden that we carry around. And the notion that because we are sinful, we are never good enough. We're never good enough. We turn up as damaged goods, and we will forever be damaged. And he said, and according to that belief, if you trust in, Jesus or God, then you can be made whole. He said, but for those of us who no longer believe in that, unfortunately, somewhere in there, we still believe that we're never good enough. And so he said, guilt is a very big one here. So he said, you will see. He said, but he said, I want you to be aware of that. In part because, he also knows that one of my favorite is actually Lojong. And some of the language of Lojong can sound like it is saying the same thing. Be the lowest among all. Take defeat upon yourself and give other victory. That kind of like self-sacrificing ideal. And that, even language like, you are sinful. You can find, in some Lojong texts, And so I was like, oh yeah, that's important to know. That's good to know, And so then before, when I was teaching Lojong, I like to say, the expressions that you find in Lojong texts, you need to understand a little bit about Tibetan people and Tibetan people's view of themselves. So that you have an understanding of like, given that culture, given their context, you have this kind of expression, this kind of language developed, right? Especially since Lojong, it said, although the beginnings was brought from India, the particular expressions, right? If you look at the Lojong text, they're not quoting Indian Buddhist texts directly. In fact, they use colloquial Tibetan to express a lot of times. A kind of very simple language, and not a lot of vocabulary, not a lot of jargon, right? So the choice of those words and how they are expressed would reflect what is most effective for the original audience. So what did Tibetan people think about themselves? What did Tibetan people generally think about themselves? And I think they're not thinking so much like we Tibetan as opposed to them Indians or, them Chinese, more like what did Tibetans think about being human, right? Based on their Tibetan experience. Well, one thing is this: no notions of original sin. No notions of how deep at your core is something that has been damaged. Definitely a lot of reminders that we each carry a lot of negative karma from past lives, for sure. But I would submit it's quite different from saying at the core, something is broken. At the core, you are never good enough. No notion of that. Instead, you have a lot of negative karma, but you are Buddha. You have a lot of negative karma. Look, your negative karma is causing you so much suffering, but you are Buddha. And everyone is Buddha. But negative karma is temporarily making you the despicable person that I'm seeing here right now. And negative karma is making you so terrible, so greedy. So you see, Very strong language is used. Huh? You are going to go to the hell realms if you continue to behave like this. In some respects, very much like, the preacher on Sunday, the damnation of hellfire. Oh, definitely, it's in, this material. But then it's all within this template, this canvas that says that canvas is pure. That nature that is true and not temporary, that innate nature is perfect. And all you have to do is to be rid of the obscuration of karma, the obscuration of afflictive emotions, the obscurations to clear seeing. Once you wipe that out, and how can you wipe those things out? Because they are not real. Absolute bodhicitta. They are not real. Even when they seem so real, they are not real in what sense? In the Buddhist context, when something is real, you can never get rid of it. No matter what you do, you can't get rid of it. But say suffering is not real. Negative karma is not real. Confusion is not real. Translation, you can get rid of them. I think maybe number 8 or number 7, the talk, Lojong, I said, when you see in Buddhist texts, when they say real and not real, they're not speaking English, I said. If you think they're speaking English, then you run into some problems, They say, oh, everything is not real, Well, try banging your head against the wall and, how long will it take before it gets real, right? So you can't everything is not real and just cross the road as you would like to cross, The Moses miracle is not going to happen with the cars, You forget about parting the Red Sea, even Haywood, on an afternoon, even during the pandemic, there's still a lot of cars, It's pretty real. Not real in Buddhism means you can get rid of them. You can purify. Fancier kind of spiritual term, you can purify. Basically, you can get rid of them. That's the good news. You can get rid of them. Absolute bodhicitta tells us that we can get rid of them. In order to get rid of them, we need to be motivated by relative bodhicitta, love and compassion. And then, when through the realization of absolute bodhicitta, all the not real negative karma, not real suffering, not real confusion, when you get rid of all of that, what's the spontaneous expression of that nature? Love and compassion. Love and compassion. So relative bodhicitta doesn't mean, when you attain the absolute, then they all disappear. No. They fully function. The essence of the Buddha state is love, compassion, joy, equanimity. And so we say them 4 immeasurable minds, which is what we repeat at the recitations that we normally start our class with. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. That is Maitri. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. That is Karuna, compassion. May they experience the happiness that is free from suffering or free from sorrow. That's joy. May they rest in equanimity. And may they abide in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. That's equanimity. It said that, yes, on this side of confusion, we train in these immeasurable minds on the basis of measured love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, first identifying what that emotion feels like, and then on the basis of a very, limited to people we like, limited to people that we care about, limited to people that we are fond of. That's okay. Using this skillful way of using self-cherishing, that's okay. You start with that. But as you start with that, you begin to develop a greater and greater capacity. So on this side of confusion, we seem to be using the four immeasurables as a way to purify the obscurations that are not real. But what's interesting is that when these are finally purified, what do you find there? Love, compassion, joy, equanimity. So it's both the means as well as the end. Right? It's both the means as well as the end result. So bodhicitta as relative bodhicitta is the means. Absolute bodhicitta is the end result. But the end and the beginning are one. Yeah. So now, if you know these recitations, you can join me. If you don't know the recitation, just listen. Then from the recitation, from the opening recitation, then we will go into the meditation portion of our Thursday program. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious awakening. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious awakening. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious awakening. Thus, until I achieve awakening, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all migratory beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all migratory beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all migratory beings. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. So please let your both body and mind to settle into their own places. Let body and mind be present in the same space. Let your mind, let your awareness pervade your entire body, so that body and mind are not separated, are not scattered. As you let body and mind settle, your body and your mind will revert back to their innate ability to be at ease. When body and mind are resting, then fight and flight is unnecessary. Although our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, if you want to look at it from that perspective, have served us well in terms of evolution, we have, however, come to a point where our sympathetic nervous system, that instinct to fight or flight, to bulk up or to lean down, and to bulk up and fight, or to lean down and run, that has become constantly the mode that we are in. So much so that we've forgotten the parasympathetic nervous system. So more than ever, in these times, learning to regain a balance between these two. So that through wisdom, we can learn how not to feel the need to always be fighting or running. Through wisdom, through absolute bodhicitta, we can develop clear seeing. And when we do have to act, when we do have to move, we train to move and to act out of love and compassion. So that then even the sympathetic nervous system, when activated, let it be motivated, fueled by love and compassion. Rather than just a primitive sense, a misguided sense of self-protection or self-cherishing. Recognize that the ultimate self-cherishing, the ultimate way of caring for self is to develop the capacity to care for all. at your own pace. Sharpen your awareness, sharpen your attention by bringing it to your breath. Counting breath. With each inhalation and exhalation, count 1, and then 2, and then 3, and see if you can reach 21. When you can successfully reach 21 without being distracted, then it is said that is a sign that we can more fully focus on the main practice of Lojong, which is the cultivation of both absolute bodhicitta, the wisdom of clear seeing, and relative bodhicitta, love and compassion. Love and compassion that is guided by clear seeing. So now, without rushing, without chasing after any goal, just sharpen, tighten your attention, clarify your attention by bringing your attention to breath, by anchoring your attention on each breath that arises and ceases from moment to moment. with regard to all experiences, all phenomena. Regard them as dreams. Regard them as what one would see in a movie, in a play. Then look at that which is regarding all these experiences as dream. What is it? Who is it? And in this way, we examine the nature of this awareness. And while investigating and looking at this nature of awareness, we find that awareness is birthless. It doesn't come from somewhere. It doesn't even remain anywhere here. And when it's gone, it doesn't go anywhere. And even though we have this method of reflecting on all objective phenomena and subjective phenomena, know that this approach, this antidote, this method should also be relinquished and not to be fixated on as something to hold on to. And when we are free from both subject, object, and even the method itself, then we can let the mind to just rest in the basic state of the mind, the nature of mind. And just abide there without distraction, without doing or undoing. Simply understand that the essence of the practice is to settle and abide in the basic state, in the alaya state. When we can have the ability to see how all appearances, all experiences, all methods of training are basically free and open. When we have experienced this oceanic nature, this vast and profound state, then we can begin to train in the practice of love and compassion. Identified here as to train in taking and sending alternately. Also known as Tonglen. Dong is to give or to release. Len is to take. Here, what it is referring to is basically referring to the training in Maitri and Karuna. Out of love, out of friendliness, out of loving kindness, we develop stronger and stronger the willingness and the ability to give others happiness, to give others freedom from suffering, to give them all the positive conditions that we have experienced ourselves, to wish them well, to wish them happiness, to wish them learning and discovering the way to be happy. And to take refers to developing compassion, which is the desire to see others be separated from suffering. And to that degree, developing our willingness to take away the suffering. Or simply put, a willingness, even at this point, to be inconvenienced in order to make things easier for others. So here the line says, train in taking and sending alternately, taking and giving. It's a reference to training in metta and karuna, to train in loving kindness and compassion. So begin by having a vivid presence of someone that you naturally have a sense of warmth towards and gratitude towards. And first train with this person, wishing them happiness, wishing them freedom from suffering, being willing to give them all the happiness that we have experienced, being willing to take from them all the suffering that you know they do not want. We cannot give what we do not have. So it's necessary for us to first identify what happiness is. And to identify the joy that comes from giving happiness. Take time to feel that, to develop that. And on that basis of having experienced happiness, we then develop the ability to give that to others. Likewise, to train in compassion, first we have to remember what it feels like to be free from suffering, to be relief of suffering. And having experienced that, having reminded ourselves on how freeing that feeling is, think about how all our mothers, all sentient beings that are kind to us as our mothers, also want that relief so much. And so we wish that for them. We wish that for them. We train in wanting to give them that, right? And to give them the causes of happiness, take away from them the causes of suffering. We take their causes of suffering not so that we feed on that suffering. We take away their suffering because we know that suffering has no basis. That at our core, everything is pristine. That suffering is only that which is temporarily arising due to causes and conditions, and therefore can be done away with, can be taken away and dissipated and dissolved and purified. So with great courage and certainty, grounded in the wisdom that arises from absolute bodhicitta, there's no problem in taking away suffering. This practice of love and compassion have to be so constant that in fact it is like the act of breathing. And so if we can harmonize our breath so that when we breathe in, we're breathing in with compassion. And when we breathe out, we're breathing out with loving kindness. Then every breath that we take becomes a practice of relative bodhicitta. Breathing in with compassion, breathing out with loving kindness. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Know that when Buddhas breathe, they breathe in with compassion and they breathe out with loving kindness. They breathe in with compassion. They breathe out with loving kindness. Compassion fuels us to act. Loving kindness allows us to relax. And it is only when these two are unified and become constant, then can we truly train in relative bodhicitta. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in with compassion. Breathe out with loving kindness. Breathe in with compassion. Breathe out with loving kindness. With compassion, we can act on behalf of all beings. With loving kindness, we can relax and be at ease. Do you have any questions or comments regarding the practice?
Dr. Lai?
Yes.
Yes, I would like to ask.
Yes.
This training basically is to train our mind. My question is from the perspective of karma. So the thought that we arise, does it contribute to the maturing of the cause of happiness in sentient beings? Or is it
so in other words, you're saying, can this actually brings happiness to others? Is that what you mean?
Yes, yes.
No. You cannot give other people happiness. In the karmic sense, you cannot give other people happiness. Other people need to have the causes for experiencing happiness. You can be a contributing condition, of course.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So it can be a contributing condition.
Yes.
As long as the person has the cause.
They have to have, the seeds, the causes for experiencing happiness. Then yes.
So when we say, when we wish sentient beings happiness and the causes of happiness, and then the happiness itself, it's not that we are wishing them. Our wish is as a contributing conditions to the maturing of the result of happiness in the sentient beings.
Yes. But primarily, this is training our own mind.
I understand. I just
and
want
then,
to clarify.
And then to the degree that you train your mind and you get closer to the state of Buddha, then to that degree, it has a direct impact on whether other people are experiencing more suffering or happiness. As in, the more Buddhas there are in the world, then the less suffering there will be. But yes, otherwise, yes, I know what you are wanting to clarify. But otherwise, still, you cannot like literally give anyone happiness or take away anyone's suffering.
Dr. Lai? These things that we don't want, confusion, suffering, conflictive emotion, guilt, bad karma, these things, they're not real, meaning they're not material, they're not substantial.
They could be substantial. They're not real, as in you can get rid of them. Okay.
But then the things that we like, happiness, joy, compassion, joy, those things are of the same nature, are they not? They're not also
right now, yes, very fleeting. Yeah, right now for sure. As for the Buddha state, are they fleeting or not? When you get there, send us a postcard. We say, you don't need to worry about that, in other words. But it'll be nice to get a postcard from, Buddha land to say, woohoo, it is real over there. That's why in the earliest layer of the Buddha's teachings, right? In a way you could say that it's much more guarded or much more conservative, when things are expressed. The Buddha is more likely to state things in terms that his audience can get. Right? Can get without needing to philosophize, do mental gymnastics, using sophisticated logic, all those stuff, all that gets developed, as Buddhism kind of evolve over time, right? With human society becoming more complex, human beings needing more and more kind of, complex explanation and all of that. But if you look at the earliest layer, right? Almost always Buddha begins by saying, he doesn't, there are some occasions, I think, where he would say, do you want to be happy? But more likely he says, are you fed up with suffering? You see, there's a difference between asking those two questions. Do you see? the difference? If you ask someone, do you want to be happy? I think it's a lot harder to answer that question. But do you want suffering? Are you fed up with suffering? That's pretty much, no need to think, oh yeah, I'm tired of it. I don't want it. So he starts where it's most obvious, which is we all don't want suffering. No matter how you define suffering, we all know I don't want. But when you say, oh, happiness. Oh, but what is happiness? Is happiness sweet or bitter? Well, I like bitter food. Much more complicated. Which is not to say that the Buddha, is not capable of answering complicated questions, but it's saying that when true happiness is achieved, everyone achieves that true happiness and experiences it the same way. But when suffering is experienced, right? We all have all kinds of different types of suffering, but we know we want to get rid of it. No matter how many types there are, nobody will say, I would like to keep type number 1, 4A, and 7B. It's like instinctively, I want to get rid of all of that. So in the earliest layer of the Buddha's teachings, he tends to pose the question of like, are you tired of your suffering or not? And in fact, there were some who said, what, suffering? No, what do you mean? He said, okay, well, then it's fine. Move on. Says, don't disturb people's minds. They're already suffering enough, Don't knock on their door and ask them, have you suffered enough?
I have a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to go back to Wei Tong's question first. When you say that, let me understand. Well, I guess what I want to ask is if I'm understanding you correctly, that when we do, for instance, the Maitri wishing someone happiness, or the Tonglen wanting to take away their suffering, do I understand you correctly, for instance, with happiness, that we're watering the karmic seeds for them? Is that correct?
No. The main point is, no, you cannot give other people suffering, and you cannot give other people happiness, and you cannot take away other people's suffering if they did not themselves have the causes for experiencing either of those through your Tonglen meditation.
But when we're doing, practices such as Tonglen, or just, prayers, wishing happiness for others, for immeasurables and things, are we watering their seeds? Or we're not really doing anything for them? We're just building up the wishes in our own hearts?
Think about this. If we can actually do something for them, right? Being that there are so many Buddhas, you and I should be happy most of the time. Surely the Buddhas and all their great compassion and all their wishes for us, would put most of us, in a pretty good time. Right? Most of us should be pretty trouble-free, suffering-free. But that's not the case.
But the aspirations create karma, don't they not?
Yes, yeah. Of
so
course.
when we're doing prayers, then if we're praying for others, but our prayers aren't really helping them, then are the prayers benefiting us because we're creating loving kindness in ourselves, you know?
Primarily benefiting us, but the act of benefiting us, that's why bodhicitta is so important. If we are benefiting us in the limited sense of the word, right, then it becomes, in another context, it's called a worldly dharma. But because we are developing bodhicitta, then we know that whatever that is benefiting us is actually going to take us closer to being awake, so that in the state of being awake, we can actually help in a meaningful way. Like right now, you know, if you think about it, really, I said, you know, I will pray for you so that you don't suffer. I will pray for you so that you will get what you want. Then when this person gets what they want, right? How many times, you know, when we get what we want, more suffering comes? Precisely because we got what we wish for. So are we helping or are we harming? So Buddhas do not indiscriminately just pray for anyone. Why? Because they can see, you know. They can see, you know, is this really going to be good for this person or not? But we are obscured, you know.
So if we're doing practices to benefit somebody, you know, or we make donations to benefit somebody, dedicate to them, then if is that, well, I guess I have two questions. Number one, is that helping them? And number two, if it's not helping them, then what is our reason for doing it? Are we building up our own bodhicitta, or what is our reason for doing that?
Yes, you're building your own bodhicitta so that you can bring genuine help later. And I think, here is the thing. I think we're overthinking this. And we're trying to figure out how karma works when it says, you know, general principles of karma is all we need to know. Exactly this cause leading to this effect, only Buddhas can see. Yeah? So we have to remember that also. So general principles of karma, we need to remember. Then when it comes to training, breathing out with compassion, breathing in, right? Breathing in with compassion, breathing out, giving loving kindness, taking with compassion, right? Just do the practice. If it can really help someone, it will help. Whether I know it or I don't know it, whether I have evidence of it or no evidence for it, it actually doesn't matter. Because we know that, you know, when there is one less suffering person, problematic person, then there is one less suffering. When I'm happy, I don't cause other people problems. When I'm unhappy, you know, it's pretty hazardous to be around me. I have no way to really show you, you know. I mean, I can say, you know, oh, yes, you know, when you pray for others, of course it helps them. A lot of times I can tell you, you know, lamas will say that, oh, yes, of course. Well, that is to encourage you to do it. Can I tell you definitively that because of your prayer, that person, you know, got well? I cannot say that, you know. I cannot say that. But what I can say is, when I know somebody is praying for me, I feel better. Is it because that person prayed for me? I can't say. But I can tell you I feel better. Yeah? If someone says, oh, well, we're praying for you. Oh, yeah. Look, people are praying for me. people are wishing me well. That much I can say. Yes, of course it helps. Now, if we want to get into like, well, karmically, is it this that then resulted in this and resulted in that? The Buddha warned, you know, he says, your head will explode. He used that expression. He says, your head will explode if you think too much about that.
Dr. Lai.
Yes.
Thank you. I love this. I have a question about the practice of the Tonglen, the relative Bodhicitta.
Yeah.
And I'm so intrigued with this approach. In the past, in studying Tonglen, it was very structured. Like you first do it with yourself, giving and taking, and then somebody you care for and a neutral person, somebody you don't like, right? And this approach is so much more open. And I'm kind of like, okay, what, who? You get my question.
If a more systematic one works very well for you, you should do that.
I'm not looking for that. I'm more interested at all. I'm more interested in this approach because there's something very, I guess is it kind of like you just go with what comes up?
In a way, yes. I want to say that sometimes what I'm trying to do, right, is to kind of not to be a contrarian, although I kind of like the idea, you know. But of course, I would not be doing my job if I was just being a contrarian. I guess maybe a better way to put it, I would like to think, is that I'm trying to show that there's another way of doing the practice. Yeah. I mean, the truth I can tell you is that the very kind of structured way, I have found, this is my own experience, I cannot speak for anyone's experience. So I don't want to tell you, I don't want to invalidate what you have validated with your own experience. But I do want to offer an insight, and I do want to offer an alternative to those who feel like the very structured way of doing this has made it very mechanical. And so has lost, right, its freshness and its power. That's one thing that I'm hoping that, suggesting that we approach this practice from this other way might bring some freshness, might bring a breath of fresh air, right? That's one. The second one is maybe even a more important point. I am a little concerned, again, based on my own experience, that when I do it in that very structured way, rather than really changing my mind, I'm simply replacing one set of ideals with another set of ideals and not actually changing my mind. That I've just like indoctrinated myself. And as long as things more or less turn out fine, then indoctrination is a good amulet. But when real tests comes, real crisis come, it might not protect me. So I'm concerned about how the memorizing almost, right? The keep repeating, it is like this, it is like this, it is like this, it is like this. I worry that what I'm actually doing is just indoctrinating myself.
And
So
what's
that's partly
important,
why.
so what's important really more is that feeling of seeing the person that you have
Yeah.
being happy like a kid playing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I ask?
Yes.
I'm confused about one thing. I mean, it makes sense to me that we are training our own mind, because if we get into thinking that we're taking someone's happiness away, then it's almost like
Taking someone's suffering.
I mean, somebody's suffering. Sorry.
Yes.
But that almost seems like an authoritarian, godlike,
Yes.
we're very powerful. And I get that we're not trying to do that.
Yes.
But you said something a few weeks back that is confusing to me. You were talking about the fact that when someone was practicing Tonglen, and when they got really frightened at the idea of taking on this suffering, then you could, as a teacher, work with that and make some progress. So that seems to me like, if we know we're not actually taking suffering because we can't, I'm not sure how to sort of put that together.
That a few weeks ago, I'm just saying that there are people who run into those problems. I'm not saying that for Tonglen to work, you have to run into that problem.
Okay.
But, however, your question is saying to me that I also need to make this point. It has to be heartfelt when you say, I take. You cannot like, actually, don't worry. You won't get in trouble. Keep taking.
No,
it doesn't work, okay?
I think if you don't feel it, you're not changing your own mind.
Yes, right. So it has to be heartfelt.
So it has to be heartfelt in order to do anything.
Sincerity is really important.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. So also for me at least, the way my mind works, when something is very, structured, I find that sincerity is sort of lost. It has become like something more technical, Yeah. That's how I am. I am not universalizing my experience, but I'm offering. For some of you, it could be from time to time. The way I talk about this practice could reinvigorate your more structured practice. For some of you, maybe you have tried the more structured and it just doesn't work that well. Then try this one and see if this will be your main kind of way of relating to this practice.
I think too that when all practices are different, and sometimes it can feel very heartfelt and sometimes it is less heartfelt or even not at all.
Yeah.
And so
session to session.
The difference in the way we feel as a result of that very sincere is very different.
Yes.
And that's what seems to make a longer term difference in the way we behave.
So developing sincerity is important.
Yeah.
And that's why I think even trying to answer the questions of like, karmically, are you actually doing something or not doing something? Again, that puts us more in the mode of like, karmic accounting.
It's not up to us to even get into that, really, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't know it, so.
Right. So I think developing authenticity and sincerity on our side, rather than thinking that it's important to, keep a bookkeep, love and suffering. But you see, that's the thing. Relative to other forms of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism has a very clear structure. Part of why I'm part of this tradition is I am attracted to that. But I'm also seeing that it can get for me, I cannot universalize my experience. I'm sharing with you, perhaps it resonates with some of you sometimes, and then that's very good. That it can get into, you lose the sense of like developing sincerity and authenticity towards the practice. On the other hand, there are people who practice, say, Zen, which is about, less structured, right? From time to time, they like, a Tibetan teacher to come and teach because, Zen sometimes can be so unstructured, like, you're just like, ooh, although the discipline keeps you less, like sway a little bit, the big stick will hit you back into shape, right? So that's their system, it's a way of kind of balancing things out. Likewise, in Tibetan Buddhism, there are things to balance it out. And I know that there is a way of practicing Lojong. And so I also want to make the point, I'm not making this up. So Jim, this approach is a much more, I would want to argue, like make the point that this is much more a, sometimes in Tibetan, they call it the beggar's way and the pandita's way. The scholar's way and the beggar's way. Beggar is not just like material wealth beggar, but rather kusali way, which is like basically like a wandering yogi way. And then a learned scholar's way. These are two modes of practice that is accounted for, talked about in Tibetan Buddhism. What we in the West are exposed to, and even in many parts of Asia, is a much more pandita way. And there's a lot to be said about that, and I am fundamentally attracted to that as well. But maybe a sign of like, this last April, I'm like, oh my God, I'm 50 now, Of course, some of you are like, it's just baby. Hey, give me a break, okay? The one who is experiencing the 50 is like, oh gosh, I'm 50 now, And on this end, I'm like, need to get to the heart of things now, All that fancy structure, It was good when I was 20 and less structured, a little wild. Okay, that wildness is like over now, more or less. Not enough energy to be wild anymore, So now, the pandita way, it's like, okay, someone else can go to take that approach and teach that, Now try to be more, a beggar. Partly a beggar is also because it's kind of lazy, So this more heartfelt way, I think, is important. But the Dalai Lama always emphasizes the importance of learning. I agree with that too, So a balance, basically. You have to find your balance. And that balance can change, Nothing is rigid. Nothing should be rigid, That balance can change. I think I mentioned this person I met many years ago, His background is he was from a kid, he was a child preacher in the Baptist tradition. So eventually becoming a Baptist minister. But then he turned to Buddhism to practice in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh. And he said, there's already a lot of heart, in the tradition that he came from. The Baptist tradition, there's a lot of heart, He says, but not a lot of structure, It says, love your neighbor as yourself, but no structure to how the heck to do that. So then he said, so then eventually he turned to Buddhism because relative to how to do it, in a structured way, there is the greatest commandment, but there is no, like, you know, like Donglen, you know, first think of your mother. Or even that, first identify what love is. Think of a child playing. Oh, that's love. Oh. Okay, now think of your mother. So easy to feel, okay, I want you to be happy. I'm so grateful for what you have done for me. I want you to be happy. And in fact, I don't want you to suffer. Oh, then on that basis, then you go broader and broader and broader and broader, right? So he said, you know, that's what I did not find in the tradition that I grew up in. But in the tradition that I grew up in, he said, you know, a lot of heart, you know, love your neighbor, you know, and you go out and do things to show, you know, to actually, you know, act out, you know, the love. He says it's there for sure, but no structure. So we have to find ways to kind of help us develop a more holistic, a more even and holistic and helpful. The more tools you have, I think, the better. But don't get addicted to collecting tools. Okay, now the samayas of Lojong. We were looking at some of those, right? So last time, don't lie in ambush. Page 8 of the main text that I've been using, don't lie in ambush. That's what we tend to do. We don't even know that that's what we're doing. In the dealings with the other people in our lives, you know, even with the people that we really care about, we still, you know, lie in ambush. And then we attack, you know. We wait for kind of their weak point, but it happens in such a subtle way that a lot of times, you know, I think very few of us actually go, let me hide, you know. But we just kind of know, you know, yeah, I'm going to say this now because it will make an impact, you know, it will hurt. It says, no, you are practicing Lojong now, you know. Don't do that. Even if, you know, you say, actually, it feels good. Yes, in the immediate, it feels good. But this pattern can lead to nothing good. To lie in ambush. And then to strike at weak points. And so this is also talking about, before you can strike at weak points, you're probably quite adept in figuring out people's weak points. So then that means it entails fault finding. Finding faults, right? But then as my teacher says, you know, that you cannot see other people as perfect. It's not their problem, you know. It's your problem. Even when we say, but I'm doing this because I want them to do better. You know? I want them to actually improve themselves. And there's a fine line, you know. I think I've said that in some ways, these teachings like this it's even harder for teachers to practice. Because part of your job as a teacher, right, is to be able to see, right, where the mistakes are so that you can help, right, the ones that have come to you and ask, can you train me? Which is basically what looking for a teacher means. You're looking to someone to say, can you train me? Can you help me? And the responsibility is tremendous, you know. And in order to really help, it's not an easy job, you know. But all of us are teachers in one form or another as well. Yeah? Because all of us in one way or another have other people who come to us asking for guidance. And so it's not easy, you know. But the gist of this not lying in ambush and not striking at weak points speaks to motivation. Yeah? What are we motivated by, you know, when we point out someone's weak point? Huh? Are we doing it because we are annoyed? Which happens a lot. And then because we're annoyed, we do it. And then because we have all sorts of Buddhist talk at our fingertips, then we might even use that. And whether we say it out loud to that person or we say it to ourselves, ultimately we're deluding ourselves. When we say, oh, well, I'm doing that for their good. When in fact, I think a lot of times it's not really motivated by for their good. It's out of, you know, annoyance, or out of the reason why you see so clearly other people's weak points often is because those weak points mean something to you personally, right? That's why it can be the person that you love so much and the person you hate so much is the same person. That's yourself. Then by extension, your partner. Then by extension, your parents. You know, like nobody can push my buttons as well as, you know, mom or dad, right? You've not seen them for a year. You arrive at, you know, for Thanksgiving, you ring the doorbell, they open the door, they've already triggered everything. Guess what? Those are all the things that you have that suddenly this like full-length mirror turns up, you know? But if it is not your issue and you see that drama unfolding, most of the time you're just not caught, you know? You're like, yeah, whatever, you know, that's their drama. So what we get annoyed at you know, when we see it in other people, almost always, you know, it's some skeletons that we refuse to clean up and bury. So we should look at that, right? Don't transfer a Ze's burden onto an ox. Ze is a hybrid animal in Tibet between a cow and a yak. It's a Ze. And Ze are famous for being very strong. So in other words, don't put, right? A heavy burden. Don't transfer the burden to somebody else. And more to the point here in the commentary, it says, you are the Ze. And whoever you are trying to unload your burden on, they are the ox. Don't give Zeus' burden to an ox. Don't put the blame on somebody else. Don't pass the buck. Now, we have to be careful, you know, all these things, don't take it, you know, like without, you know, really considering it, you know. So for now, you know, you say, I really can't take this burden. Fine. Then you don't carry it. But don't give it to someone else. It's okay to say, you know, this Ze right now cannot carry the burden. But don't dump it on some ox, you know, you're going to kill the ox. So you figure out, you know, where you're going to put the burden. Don't give it to an ox. Then you put it down for a while, but you do want to recognize, you know, actually I'm a Ze, and I can carry this burden. Then difficult situations and difficult things, we're not in the habit of, the minute they turn up, we look for oxes to throw it on. So in other words, we're building strength by thinking that, you know, I'm a Ze. I can carry this burden, especially if I'm carrying it and relieving other people of the difficulty. Do it, you know. And when you do it, of course, the occasion for regret is always present, especially when we're still not very good at this. So we have to guard that, okay? Especially at the beginning, don't overextend yourself with these trainings. They are, remember, these are only helpful if you are doing your main practice. These are given to protect the main practice. If you're not doing the main practice and you're just keeping these, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, it doesn't work so well. Then it will be forced. It is not out of sincerity. It is not out of authenticity. It is out of looking like a Lojong practitioner and not actually practicing Lojong. It's so easy, you know, to say, oh, this is the look, and so I'm going to, you know, look like one. Then again, indoctrinating ourselves with these samayas. Don't be so loyal, don't retaliate, don't lie in ambush, don't strike at weak points, don't transfer the Zeus burden. Just in a very kind of like, I have to live up to this image. But the mind is not being changed, you know. Don't focus on winning. Don't focus on winning. Here, the different commentaries actually, I mean, a lot of these, like each commentary has a certain direction, and that just again shows to us, you know, these things are not meant to be studied like philosophical statements, you know. They are meant to be evocative. So there's a lot of flexibility. Don't read the Lojong trainings like you're reading some legal document, you know. What are the parameters of this, you know, argument here? and what are the precedents and how do we get around? No. Then you're approaching this completely wrong. This is evocative, right? So it says, another translation, don't sprint to win a race. So I'll read you one commentary, the oldest commentary. It says, avoid such behavior as attempting through unbecoming conduct and other means to transfer the ownership of commonly owned desire objects to yourself. You should not be in a state of craving when you die. And since the other shore comes into being as a result of karma anyway, it is far more joyful instead to let go with a sense of ease, the master said. So first, with regards to mundane things, don't be so focused on achieving all those goals. Secondly, this talk about the other shore, it says, even in the spiritual case, you have to trust that if you are creating the right causes, the right results will come. You should not obsess over it. The other shore being nirvana, ultimately. You need to have a trust that, I have done everything. Then when the time is right, the fruits will come. And not like, how can I win? How can I win? How can I get the prize? How can I, It's saying that. So this is one. Then another commentary says, let me see. It says, do not use different techniques to acquire collective resources for your own private enjoyment. So here, the nuance here seems to be like, if you are going to acquire, you can acquire for the greater enjoyment of everyone. But don't try to hoard, including hoarding spiritual attainments. But to always think, if you're going to collect, if you're going to win, it is for the greater good that you should keep your focus on. Then the next line says, do not misuse this as a magical right, meaning do not use Lojong as a way to become successful in the world. Do not relate to Lojong. I would even say, this would apply to, do not relate to this like it's some sort of mechanical thing that you're doing. So back to the issue of it has to be heartfelt. Don't, as much as, I often say that all these are techniques and tools that the Buddha gave, but I don't want to give the impression, like it's some kind of mechanistic, that the sincerity is not necessary. Right? You just need to figure out the right technique and everything will work. No. I don't mean to communicate that. When I say that the Buddha's teachings and all the practices are tools, what I mean there, what I'm emphasizing there is you have to apply them. You cannot just believe in them. You cannot just memorize them. You have to apply them. And when it comes to applying them, you have to apply them in a heartfelt manner. You have to apply them, from the core of your being. It's more important to develop sincerity with regards to the practice rather than like thinking, I'm going to work on my technique. Yeah. In fact, you can even think, right? I'm thinking of like figure skating, right? How often you will hear a comment or judgment, you know, technically flawless, but no heart. So no 10 points. So especially with Lojong, it has to be heartfelt. Following from that, it says, don't turn gods into demons, which is don't turn dharma, gods in that sense. Don't turn dharma into a cause for suffering. So Gampopa says, if you don't know how to practice dharma, practicing dharma will lead you to the lower realms. So that's why these 4 dharmas of Gampopa, I was starting this teaching with another group. The first dharma is, may the dharma go in the direction of dharma. So meaning, you know, when I practice the Buddha's teachings, you know, may it be for the reasons that the Buddha taught it. So you cannot practice Lojong, you know, to have a better advantage in business. That would be to turn gods into demons. Make you a better manager. Make you a better salesman. You cannot do that. Finally, don't make others' suffering the means of your happiness. Sometimes, you know, we feel good, you know. When people that we don't like, you know, they suffer. So now, you know, public figures and their suffering. Please watch out, you know, don't rejoice in their suffering. Even if you disagree with their policy, 200%, you know, don't. In the Bodhisattva trainings, it says, you know, it is harmful for a Bodhisattva to have a despising heart, even to a burnt stump. Yeah. When an angry thought is directed at even a burnt stump, meaning like the most useless of useless things. That's the meaning of burnt stump. If you display anger towards even a burnt stump, it is an obstacle for a bodhisattva. And so, don't seek, don't make other people's suffering as an element, as part of your happiness. And so then the commentary says, this refers to not drawing personal gratification from others' miseries. Do not, for example, harbor thoughts such as, if my spouse or this particular friend dies, their family lineage will come to an end. This is very kind of Tibetan examples. Family allegiances and family loyalty and therefore family grudges are very strong. Very strong. I like to footnote that and say, you know, before we feel superior about ourselves and say, oh, our culture doesn't think like that, you know, it's, you have to remember the living conditions of Tibetans are very hard, you know, in that elevation where there's so limited land to grow and growing season. life is very precarious. And so then belonging to a family, strength of the family, strength of the village, strength of the clan, loyalty to each other, is a life and death matter. So we can translate that to our context and say, what about us, given our situation, how does that manifest, this wish like, oh, if they are, if that person dies, then their family lineage will end. What that means is, like, why would, someone think like this? The point here is, therefore, whatever grudges, that this family has been carrying for 6 generations, that 6 generation back, my grandfather, killed their, my great grandfather killed their great granduncle, has been carried down. So as long as there is, like, continuing of that lineage, that grudge gets carried down. And that would be why you might be happy. Oh, good, that lineage has ended. So my family don't have to live in fear that one day somebody from that family gains the upper hand and they're going to destroy us. This is what's going on here. But then here he says even, oh, if that wealthy benefactor becomes ill or dies, I will have the opportunity to accumulate merit and roots of virtue. This is talking about religious people. Because in traditional Tibetan culture, when someone is ill, somebody dies, you go to the monastery to make offerings. So he's very honestly saying there are some, religious people, it's like, oh, it's been a while, somebody came to give some offerings, And then, some people come and they're like, oh, our, grand aunt just died, please do prayers, Now, you might not actively go, yes, congratulations, she died. But somewhere in there, there is a sense of like, oh, well, not too bad, I get to say some prayers, I get some, a pound of sugar or a bag of, rice. So it's saying, even like in this very subtle ways, that even if we're not actively wishing for other people's misery, which I think, I think everyone that's hearing this, I'm pretty sure, we don't think like this. But even that, we have to examine how our happiness might be built on the basis of someone else's suffering. Don't be blind to that. Don't be blind to that. Your not intending to harm is an important thing to make sure that you don't encourage. But to me, what this is saying also is, even beyond that, just guarding against wishing somebody harm, that only is preventing you from creating negative karma. But you are not creating positive karma until you take it to the next level, which is trying your best so that your happiness is not built on the basis of other people's suffering, even when you don't intend it. So for that, I think the burden is heavier for those who are doing well. This is not about guilting us, That's also important to recognize. Using guilt doesn't really have a role, in the Lojong tradition. It's not about guilting us. It's not about whether you deserve to do well or not. It is just developing a more sensitive understanding to how, even when we don't intention it, even when we don't intend it. We could be building our happiness on the basis of other people's suffering. At the very least, we should be aware of that.
I think there's a very subtle element to that as well. And that is when we see tragedy, sometimes the first thought is, boy, I'm glad that didn't happen to us.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a real, I think,
yes.
common
initial
thought.
Right, right. And we will have that thought, but it's good now that when we have that thought, we also have some clarity about all the layers that's going on there. Yeah? Not to, trigger guilt or anything, but just to say, wow, And I would think, like even in the tradition that talks about, sin and how everyone is a sinner, I can see how it can work in the right way. When it really gets to the heart, which is your recognition of sin, in the Christian tradition, I would say, can be a positive thing when you see how pervasive self-cherishing is. And to me, then in those Christian terms, to surrender to Jesus is to give up self-cherishing. But it has to be developed authentically. It should not be a membership card. And so sincerity is important. And with that, it cannot be forced. It takes time to develop sincerity. Not easy, but it's the best way. Rather than figuring out techniques, especially those of us in the US, our culture emphasizes efficiency and always figuring out, a more efficient way of doing something. The danger of that is everything is something to be manipulated. Dharma cannot be practiced that way. This is what these last few lines are basically saying, don't turn gods into demons. Don't use this like it is some kind of magical rite. Yeah. Don't turn this into yet another way to prop up the ego. So develop awareness and clarity about our karmic situation, so to say. And only in that way, can we develop sincerity and humility and practice this in a heartfelt way. That's it for tonight. It's already very late, in fact. Got carried away. Thank you for being patient and staying. In any case, didn't even have a break. So, oh my goodness. Very unreasonable. Get carried away, So anyway.
Thank you, Dr. Lai.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
And I'll see you all, next Thursday. And be well. Don't be so hard on yourself. Then it's easier not to be so hard on other people.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us so much to think
Thank you,
about.
Dr. Lai.
Yes.
Good night.
And one last thing. Dedication. Kyangju sem chorim punje ma ge pa nam ge gyurje Geba nyampa mepa yang gong ne gong du bewar shu. Good night, good night, good night.
Night.